So we ended last time talking about what rhetoric is not a lot more than we talked about what it is, and we concluded by understanding that rhetoric is associated with convictions. And at the end of our last lesson, we promised to pick up that idea of rhetoric and convictions and carry that idea forward and explore it a little bit more thoroughly. So that's what we want to start with here. Basically, there are a couple of things to think about in this lesson. One, we're going to be looking at, eventually, how one forms rhetorical convictions. But before we do that, we want to focus a little bit on the kinds of things that people have convictions about, right? What do we have these confidences in? So those will be the two aspects. We're going to start with that second one. What is it that people have confidence in based on those good reasons, but that they can't prove, all right? Well, when we think about rhetoric and convictions, when we think especially about this idea of conviction, about something we've got confidence, trust, faith in, we basically can come up with four fundamental areas where people formulate their convictions. The first is politics. We have faith, we have confidence, we have certain trust, we have convictions about our political point of view, why we think one party or the other party is the better party, or why we think both parties are terrible, or why we think that some third party is to be preferred to either of the two main parties. All of those things are based in reasons, but of course you can't prove anything in particular. So we know that politics is one area where people formulate their basic convictions. Another area where we see convictions formed is, of course, in areas of faith, in religion. People form their religious beliefs, their religious convictions, and they do so based on all kinds of reasons in their life, and it's not, in many ways, it's very similar to how they form convictions in any other arena, as we're going to see. But we know that faith is an area of, oddly, faith. So faith is an area where people have convictions, they have confidence, they have trust in a system or in a view of God that is taught to them. So religion is another place where we find people building their convictions. A third area that we find is human relationships. And here, when we think of human relationships, we're thinking about the broadest possible range of what we mean by human relationships. So, both very specific questions like who should you marry? And then, much broader questions, big sociological questions like what is the purpose of marriage? Who gets to define marriage? Is marriage a religious concept? Is it a sacred concept? Is it a secular concept? Where is it sacred and where is it secular? And how do you figure all of that out? Okay, all of those are areas in which people can form convictions. They can, that is, put forward arguments. They can say, I have this conclusion, and I've got some pretty good reasons to back it up. So all of those, the whole scope, the whole gamut, is romance better than friendship? Is friendship to be considered a higher goal in life than cooperation, than just sort of a transactional view? Is transactional views, I'll give you a bit of loyalty if you give me a bit of loyalty. Is that a good way to build a friendship, or are friendships more about sharing goals and sharing perspectives? All of those questions about human relationships, they're all matters of conviction. They're all matters of faith. Finally, there's a fourth area that we go to, and in this fourth area, it's got the funny word aesthetics. Aesthetics is basically an arena in which we think about ideas of what's beautiful, how beauty is related to truth, how beauty is related to goodness. Is beauty related to truth or goodness? Is beauty out there, or is it just simply a matter of personal taste? Oh, is it a matter of preference? Or is there something that makes beauty more real, more substantive? Well, aesthetics stands in for us for a large array of questions that we raise, philosophical questions about truth, about beauty, about goodness, about if they're related, how they're related, are they real, or are they things we just sort of come to in our own minds? This will tie us back in the long run. All of these things will, but especially this question will tie us back to those theoretical views that we've discussed. The mimetic, that's a view that says, hey, truth, beauty, goodness, that stuff is out there somewhere. And our job in language, like our job in culture, is to try and create expressions that are as close to those realities as we can come to. The constitutive view says, no, truth, beauty, goodness, that's a matter of however we define it, because we're negotiating together to sort of build a shared image of these things. That's what's really going on. There isn't a reality out there that we're trying to imitate or represent. So remember our theoretical discussion? Well, it applies to all four of these areas, but especially we're going to see it in the area of aesthetics if we were to crack that one open and go deeper in it. So there we are. None of these areas are science. None of these areas are built around this concept that you're going to come to an absolute certainty. It doesn't matter how strong your faith is in your political convictions or your convictions about beauty or your religious convictions or your convictions about the fact that you believe friendship is superior to romantic relationships or vice versa. None of that matters. And hold in mind, there isn't any way to get to knowledge. None of these offer us a chance to say we absolutely know. Now you can don't misunderstand us here. It isn't a realm of knowledge we're working with. But you can be really confident. You can be ready to die over your political views. I mean, soldiers do all the time. They swear an oath to their country, and they put their life on the line to follow up on that oath. That's a pretty high level of conviction, okay? I mean, it's hard to get much higher than to say, I'm ready to live or die for this. But that doesn't mean that they're crazy or fanatical. We'll talk about fanaticism down the road, but I don't want us to confuse the idea of convictions with crazy fanaticism. We mean, when we talk about convictions, simply good, solid, well-reasoned beliefs, but they're not science. But if they're not science, they're also not just matters of personal preference. They're not just simply matters of what you want, your own private desires. It's not this stuff either. That's not what we're doing in the world of conviction either. Over here in religion, in relationships, in aesthetics, in politics, we're building a belief, a confidence, and we're basing it on very good reasons. It is not the arena of science. It is not the arena of private preference. It is great confidence based on good reasons, even though you can't prove them. So that is how rhetoric and convictions come together when we begin to think about convictions. All right. Convictions, we remember, convictions are rooted in that space between science, knowledge, and mere personal desire and personal preference. So these are the two arenas that are out there, and right in the middle of those is this arena of pistis, of conviction. We form our pistis, our conviction, in these four areas we've talked about. So if we want to think about convictions, we can start with, well, where do we form convictions? Okay, now we know. We form convictions in politics. We form convictions in religion. We form convictions in our idea of human relationships. We form convictions in matters of aesthetics. All of these are spaces that do not allow us the kind of knowledge that we get in science. But they're not matters of simply private, personal preference, desire. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, one candidate probably is better for the country than the other candidate, but we cannot absolutely know that in most situations. We just have to make a judgment call. We have to make our best judgment. We have to form our confidence based on the reasons we offer. So there they are. Those are the four areas. And those four areas will lead us to conviction. Every one of them, all roads here, go to conviction. This is where convictions are formed. They're formed in politics, they're formed in religion, they're formed in relationships, they're formed about aesthetics. Those are the spaces that will lead us to conviction. Now, if that's where we form our convictions, let's begin to shift to that other question, which is, how do convictions get formed? And here we're going to come full circle, and we're going to come back to rhetoric. How are convictions formed? Well, we have another one of those great Greek words. Convictions are formed from enthymemes. They're called enthymemes. All right? Now, enthymemes are how we make convictions. So let's pause just a minute, refresh our memory here. Remember what a conviction is. Conviction is confidence, it's faith, it's trust in, belief in, with good reasons. It's not arbitrary, it's not blind faith, it's not crazy trust, it's not wild, unfounded confidence. It's confidence, faith, trust that's built with good reasons, even though you can't get to absolute proof. You're looking at it through a smeared window. You can't give an absolutely perfect description. But you can build some pretty good reasons for your convictions in every one of these areas. So if a conviction is a confidence, faith, a trust built on good reasons, even though you don't have absolute proof, let's go back to enthymemes. What's an enthymeme? Well, the enthymemes are the good reasons that you're giving for your confidence, for your faith, for your trust. That's what we've got. That's the nature of the enthymeme. Now, you'll look up enthymemes online. You'll get all kinds of crazy stuff about, syllogisms with hidden parts and all this. Aristotle's relatively clear. He says, basically, enthymemes are rhetorical ways of thinking. It's the rhetorical way of thinking. When he says rhetorical way of thinking, he means the way of thinking about all those things that build convictions in the arena of our politics, our religion, our relationships, our aesthetics. All the things that build conviction. Those are enthymemes. They're the good reasons for our pistis, confidence, conviction. Now, if enthymemes are the good reasons for our convictions in these areas, does anything count as an enthymeme? Well, broadly speaking, pretty much. Any good, decent reason that you can give for me to share your political view or for me to accept your religious view, and that includes, remember here, your religious view would include the view that religion is to be rejected. All religion is false. That's a religious view too. Any reason that you can give me to accept your religious view or your idea that beauty is simply in the eye of the beholder. There's no such thing as real beauty. It's all just in perception. Or that in human relationships, modeling your friendships on business relationships where there are transactions is the wisest way to go. Anything, if you give me reasons for any of those positions, you're giving me enthymemes. Now, good reasons, not crazy reasons, right? You have to give me a reason that's sound enough, that hangs together well enough, so that even if I disagree with you, I have to think for a minute and say, well, honestly, that's good. I gotta think about that for a bit. Okay, that's an enthymeme. That's an enthymeme. When you put together a reason that's good enough that when I consider a view here, I have to say to you, well, yeah, let me think about that. When you've done that, you've built an enthymeme. Now, generally speaking, we talk about enthymemes in three different arenas. Okay, so we talk about three types of enthymemes. Aristotle puts them together in ways that help us understand the way enthymemes build confidence and faith. All right? And the first one he goes to is logos. Now, logos is an incredibly complicated word. Lots of meanings. It means a word. It means an argument. It means evidence. It means reasons. Tons and tons of definitions inside this word. But in essence, when Aristotle says that there are enthymemes that we could call logos, and by logos he just simply means a set of enthymemes that work in a specific way. Well, okay, how do logos enthymemes work? Well, logos enthymemes demonstrate a sort of disciplined reason, thought, really careful or deep or thorough reflection about what's really at stake here. And I'm not talking about wild, crazy, conspiracy theory reflection that connects, the face on Mars with the clouds on Venus and explains that that's why there's a pyramid. That's not what we mean at all. We don't mean, reflection doesn't mean that you're able to draw together things that might maybe be unrelated, okay? What we're talking about here is discipline, trained, carefully assembled reflection, thoughtful consideration of something. And when you demonstrate that you have thoughtfully considered, that you are willing to reflect carefully, both on your own position and on challenges to that position, and you're able to put together, to present a series of reasons that make sense, then you are building enthymemes that Aristotle would say are logos enthymemes. They're logical. Now, don't get too hung up. Don't stretch that word logical too far. He just means that they hang together well, that they make sense, that they correspond to reality out there, that they're not crazy, but that they show careful, disciplined reflection. Now, when you do that, you're building enthymemes out of logos. A second area, a second kind of enthymeme, if you will, a second area where we build good reasons for making our convictions is pathos. Now, pathos is different from ethos. It's about disciplined feeling, emotion, trained instinct. Now, not just instinct. We're not talking about here. Don't confuse pathos, feeling, emotion, instinct, with desire and preference. They're not the same thing. Desire and preference is untrained, undisciplined, not reflective. Pathos is disciplined feeling. It's the kind of feeling where you have trained yourself, or at least you've been willing to be trained, so that when you face something terrible, you feel terrible. And when you face something glorious, beautiful, you feel amazed, awed. When you face something sublime, you feel small, you feel humble, right? So it's the kind of emotion that has been taught. It's not raw emotion. It's not your gut level instinct about everything. It's the kind of instinct that has been disciplined and trained so that it responds appropriately. In other words, it assumes, Aristotle is certainly assuming, that there are certain things that require you to feel a certain way. And if you aren't feeling that, then you've got a problem. That's really Aristotle's position. So Aristotle thinks that if you see injustice in the world, and it doesn't make you a little bit sad and a little bit angry, then somewhere along the way you weren't taught properly. Okay, you're supposed to be upset when you see injustice. That would be the disciplined part of feeling, emotion, instincts. So your reflection that happens in logos is also actually part of what happens in pathos. Just like the feelings in pathos should at some level involve the discipline of thinking clearly. So Aristotle is not thinking of these as absolutely severed, separate groups. But he does say that there are enthymemes that are built upon logos, and there are enthymemes built upon pathos, and that both of these involve discipline, careful teaching and training, so that you can think carefully and deeply, and so that you will feel appropriately when you face certain kinds of situations, so that when you see injustice, you're angry. And when you see justice, you are satisfied. That you feel peaceful in the presence of things that are peaceful. That you feel hesitation in the face of things that are uncertain. So these are all aspects of what Aristotle thinks of as a pretty well-balanced human being. So that's another way of assembling an enthymeme. Now, remember, a pathetic, this is called a pathetic, like this is logical, this is pathetic. A pathetic enthymeme is an enthymeme that basically lodges itself in this kind of reason for forming convictions about one of these areas here, rooted in proper feeling. That's the goal. That's the idea. For a lot of us, this idea of pathos, of proper feeling, it feels a little weird because we've been, we have been taught so much to say, well, it's up to you. You decide what you prefer. That's a large part of our education. We don't want this area of preference to be curtailed too much. But Aristotle and the Greeks in general are perfectly willing to say, okay, have preference, have desire, it's all out there, that's true, but also recognize certain things do require us to discipline our emotions. If your emotions want you to be cruel to animals, then that's an emotion that Aristotle would say is kind of out of line. Okay, just random cruelty isn't a good feeling. It's not a good emotion. So let's think of this in terms of what you and I might think of as a relatively healthy, well-adjusted, psychological experience of life. That's kind of what Aristotle's getting at when he thinks of pathos. Relatively healthy, well-adjusted, fairly solid, reliable, psychological experience of the way life really is. Logos, disciplined reason. Pathos, disciplined feeling. There's a third one, of course, ethos. In ethos, we're looking at a different line of reasoning. Now remember, all of these are basically sets, groups of, or lines of, good reasons for forming our convictions in these areas. Ethos is another one. Ethos is where we rely on proven authorities, solid institutions, trustworthy counselors. Now here you gotta remember a couple of things about ethos. One, ethos means proven authorities. Now this is not somebody who floated your boat last week at a TED Talk. Okay, that's not what we're talking about at ethos. Ethos is an institution, a group that has a long, reliable, luxurious history of providing really solid counsel on how to conduct your affairs, how to live life in a rich, rewarding, flourishing way. Those are your proven authorities. Now, ethos works in a couple of ways. We're thinking here now about building lines of reason, and certainly we're thinking now about that large scope of proven authorities and institutions and counselors. That's what ethos is. We also have to remember that any single individual rhetor who stands up to try and convince us about any particular point of view, that individual rhetor is going to need ethos as well. So we want to listen to people, and that person individually has to, take steps to show that they have personal, private ethos. They have credibility. They are, in fact, a reliable counselor in this. Now, how do individual rhetors do that? Well, there are a lot of ways. One, they'll stand up and somebody will introduce them and talk about all the awards they've won or the degrees they've earned. That's what they're doing. They're basically building ethos, right? They're telling you this person, when this person is talking to you about what you should think, feel, say, believe, do, with regard to human relationships or politics. When this person talks, you really ought to listen to them because they are reliable. They are trustworthy. So the individual ethos is built that way. When a speaker stands up after they've gotten these introductions, and if they mention, their awards or their time spent studying at Princeton or their graduation, how they got their PhD from Oxford, these are, when they're dropping those names, they're not just being, maybe they are, maybe they're just being disingenuous jerks, but most of the time when speakers do that sort of thing, they're doing that sort of thing in an effort to build their ethos, in an effort to let you know that, I didn't just wander in off the street. I've done this a while. I've thought about this a while. I've given this some reflection. So they build their ethos that way. They basically drop references to institutions or other authorities that have endorsed them. So that's one way they do it. Another way that an individual rhetor will build their own private, personal ethos is by showing that they have logos and pathos. In fact, logos plus pathos, when you combine them, you get ethos. Say that again. When you combine logos and pathos, you get ethos. Somebody is credible. They show themselves reliable, trustworthy, individually, when they demonstrate that they can think carefully and that they understand the priorities, the sort of well-being that's at stake in this topic. So when they can think clearly and demonstrate that to you, and show that their priorities, their sense of what's important and what's less important in this, when those are balanced, when those come together, when they combine logos and pathos inside their presentation, they're building their ethos. That's what's happening. Now, stepping back to the broader picture, ethos is proven authorities. These are institutions, that have shown themselves capable of guiding human beings in making good decisions about what to believe or think or say or do, what to have confidence in with regard to their politics, with regard to their religious life, with regard to their relationships, or the bigger questions about truth, beauty, and goodness that are out there. When we think about ethos at the institutional or at the sort of social level, ethos can be like literally functioning governmental institutions. They can be documents. You ask any religious person about the sacred texts that are part of their religious life, they're obviously going to tell you, yeah, these are reliable authorities. Now, what they mean by that is, look, these documents have been around for eons, sometimes thousands of years, and they have, in a wide variety of circumstances, in a wide variety of settings, under all kinds of challenges, they have proven themselves a reliable authority, a reliable counselor for making my convictions a person's convictions about how to live their religious life, how to live a religious life that flourishes. Same thing in politics. So, you ask an American about the Constitution. Okay, so 250 years almost we've had this Constitution. Okay, it's been through a lot, and it's carried us through a lot. I mean, we've had a civil war. We have had 2 world wars that we've been part of. The Great Depression. It's gotten, the country has rallied around the ideas inside that document frequently. And so our political convictions, we can say, are founded on good reasons to trust this document. Now, it doesn't mean that just because something is old and has been around a long, long time, it's always right. Of course not. That's no, nobody's saying that at all. We just mean that if it's got a really good proven track record, you want to approach too much change, too quick of an alteration. You want to do that carefully, because this is a document, this is a system, this is an institution that has ethos. That's what ethos means. It means it's reliable enough that if you're going to start, you know, tweaking it or changing it, let's make really sure you've got a lot of really good reasons to do that before we go too crazy on undermining things that are ethical, things that have ethos to them. All right, so how do we form convictions? Well, we form convictions with enthymemes. What are enthymemes? Oh, they're the good reasons we give that back up our convictions. Oh, what kind of enthymemes are there? Well, there are three basic large sets. There are the enthymemes that rely most on thinking clearly. There are the enthymemes that rely most on appealing to a sense of flourishing, of well-being, of healthy feeling and interaction with the world, of having a good, well-balanced life of psychological well-being. And then there are the kinds of appeals that say, well, okay, now hold on. Yeah, let's think about that, but hold in mind, here are some other institutions and authorities that we want to get into the conversation because they have proven themselves reliable counselors as human beings have struggled to make good decisions about their convictions. Those are the arenas in which we're going to make our decisions: politics, religion, relationships, aesthetics. We're going to make our convictions out of enthymemes. There are three kinds of enthymemes that are going to help form those convictions: logos, pathos, and ethos. Now, if we were to put this all in a nice, clear, clean-cut little form, it would look like this. This is just a little bit more formal presentation of what we just drew. All right? Basically, convictions, over here, pistis, convictions are supported by enthymemes, which are composed from a combination of. Now remember, these are lines of reasoning. They're always braided together in some way or another. You don't ever get just any single logos. It's always going to be logos tapping a little bit into pathos. It's going to be ethos tapping into logos a little bit. I mean, these things are going to shade off into each other, right? But generally speaking, the enthymemes that are going to build our convictions are formed in three basic areas: logos, pathos, and ethos. Those come together and they form our convictions in these basic areas: politics, religion, relationships, aesthetics. According to Plato, if your life is being lived in a flourishing way, that is, you're thinking about, you're examining your life, you're considering your choices, you're trying to train yourself to have a healthy, flourishing psychological experience of the real world out there. You're listening to people who are, that we could reasonably suggest might be wiser than us because they've got a long track record of proven good advice, right? So if we've got that, according to Plato, then the convictions that we have in any one area up here, politics or relationships, that's going to help us understand, form worthwhile convictions in the area of religion or aesthetics. Likewise, your religious views can help you form better views of relationships or aesthetics. So these things interact in Plato's mind. And they interact to form pistis, conviction, confidence, faith. That's what they do. And pistis is not that world of episteme or scientia. It's not that world of knowledge. Okay, in knowledge, we don't have discussions. We don't have debate. You just go out, you do the math, you do the science. That's how you get to knowing stuff, right? As we've seen. And they don't really deal with this world of personal preference, personal desire. Your preference for being a beach person instead of a mountain person, or liking, chocolate instead of vanilla. I mean, let's not be, okay, let's just be blunt. Nobody cares. Okay, so some people care, right? People who love you care. But nobody else does. Nobody cares whether you like chocolate or vanilla, unless they love you at some level. I certainly don't care whether you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream. Why not? Because I don't love you. But people do love you. There are people out there, and they do care. And in fact, at one level, if we go back to human relationships, at one level, that's almost the definition of friendship. Friendship is when I begin to care about what your personal preferences are, just your gut level responses to the world that don't have any reason or rhyme to them. When I begin to show that interest in you, I'm forming a connection. I'm forming a bond of love, not love in necessarily a romantic way, but love in some sense of friendship, commitment to you. Especially when I begin to wonder in my relationship, not only about what your personal preferences are, but when I begin to care about what your views of my personal preferences are. All of a sudden now, wow, that's a whole nother bridge I've crossed, a whole nother level of commitment that I'm beginning to feel toward this relationship. Okay, I mean, it's almost the definition of love, is to begin to care about the sort of irrelevant things that go on in another person's life. Okay, but in terms of the world of rhetoric as a whole, personal preference, whether you're a beach person or a mountain person, whether or not you like the Avengers, I mean, honestly, that's just not something we deal with. We don't care. Now, what we care about is the moment you begin to give reasons for your experiences, your beliefs, your perspectives, your faith, your confidence. When you give reasons for that, then we're beginning to deal with something called rhetoric. We've said that rhetoric deals with uncertainty. It's not about knowing, doesn't lead to knowledge. It can't lead to knowledge. It doesn't have that ability. But it's not just about personal preference. It's not about things that really just don't matter that much. I mean, it's about big things. How are we going to live our life together? That's politics. What are the most important things in the world? Is it human society, or is there something beyond and above human society? Okay, those are questions of religion. Okay, how do I learn to love? What does it cost? Is it worth it? Okay, is love worth it? Those questions of human relationship, big questions. That's not just a matter of personal preference. What does it mean to think something's beautiful? What is that supposed to do to us inside? Is it supposed to do anything? Does it matter at all? Okay, those are big questions about how to live a life of human flourishing. Okay, these are really valuable, important questions. So they aren't questions that are irrelevant personal preferences. Yet we can't know them. So, what the heck is rhetoric? We've talked so much about what it's not. And we've kicked around the idea that it's certainly tied to uncertainty, and it's somehow related at some level to conviction. What are we going to do? How are we going to define rhetoric? Okay, well, here's a definition for us. Rhetoric is the artistic use of language to build human convictions with enthymemes. There it is. In a nutshell, that's rhetoric. Rhetoric is the artistic use of language to build human convictions with enthymemes. Now, we can also say, if you want to just sort of lighten that definition up a little bit, we can say, rhetoric is the artistic use of language to shape the heart, the mind, or the will. That's what we mean by building convictions. To shape the heart, the mind, and the will of a human being, or of some human enterprise, right? Some human job or goal that we're all working on. All right, so rhetoric is the artistic use of language to build human convictions with enthymemes. Or you might say, rhetoric is the artistic use of language to shape the heart, the mind, or the will of a human being. That's rhetoric. Now, things that are common here in both of these expressions, and they mean more or less the same thing, but especially this phrase, the artistic use of language. Let's take a look at that one carefully. When we talk about the artistic use of language, that means that the rhetor, the person who built that artifact we're looking at, the rhetor crafted their language somehow. They made decisions. Now, those decisions may have been made on the fly, Right? They may have been just sort of almost instinctual, just snap, 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 and they just suddenly felt like we need to go this way and not that way. Okay, but they were certainly decisions that were made about what they're going to say. What's the content of this thing going to be? When are they going to say that? And by when, we mean, at every level. Like, how do they organize what they're going to say? Like, what comes first, second, and third? And when do they speak up and when do they stay silent? To whom are they going to say this? How are they going to say it? Are they going to write a book? Do a blog? Stand up on a soapbox in the middle of the park? How are they going to get this idea that they've got across? At the most fundamental level, the artistic use of language simply means that the rhetor is making decisions about what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. That is essentially what that phrase, the artistic use of language, means. So, we're at a place where we can start tying a bow on this entire exercise. Criticism is the process of making reasoned judgments. Rhetoric is the artistic use of language to shape the heart, mind, or will. So rhetorical criticism is the process of making reasoned judgments about the artistic use of language in order to shape the heart, the mind, or the will. Rhetorical criticism is the process of making reasoned judgments about the artistic use of language to shape the heart, mind, or will of a human being. Now, since we have emphasized this idea about the artistic use of language, meaning the sort of decisions that a rhetor makes, we can say also, perfectly valid also, to say rhetorical criticism is the process of making reasoned judgments about the decisions the rhetor made when putting together and presenting this artifact, this thing you're looking at, this thing you're making judgments about. Rhetorical criticism is the process of making reasoned judgments about the crafted use of language. If rhetorical criticism is the process of making reasoned judgments about the decisions a rhetor has made, then we need to begin thinking now more specifically about how we're going to make those reasoned judgments. In other words, now we need to begin to turn our attention to the ideas of analysis, of how the critic will begin to form their reasoned judgments about the decisions the rhetor has made.